As I mentioned at the top of the show, we are following breaking news out of New York City, where a bail hearing is being held for Sean Diddy Combs. Earlier today, he was cleared of the most serious charges he faced while being convicted of two prostitution-related charges. Each count carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. His lawyers are asking that he walk free while he awaits sentencing. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Is that what we're going to? Hi, Jessica. Okay, I believe
Hi.
we have an announcement from the judge about whether or not Sean Diddy Combs will be released. Tell my audience what that announcement is.
So it looks like right now the judge is denying bail, meaning that he will not be released pending the sentencing hearing. I want to emphasize that there are two things happening basically at once. Today is about the conditions of release, if any, and it looks like the reporting from inside the courtroom is that Sean Combs will not be released on bail. The judge right now is going through a number of different reasons. Again, very quick reporting indicates that the judge is citing to the defense attorney's own statements during the case that Sean Combs is a violent person, has had violent personal relationships. But of course, the defense said that doesn't mean he's guilty of racketeering. It looks like the judge is now using those statements to say he should be denied bail. Separate, what we know is that there will be a sentencing hearing. The prosecution has said we're going to ask for a good deal of time. We don't know exactly what that is. And the defense obviously wants no time at all. So two different hearings on two different issues. The sentencing is not today.
Right. And Jessica, to remind the audience, Sean Diddy Combs has been in custody since September. Is it, and I know this is not a typical case, he is by far not a typical defendant, and these are not typical charges, but if you have been incarcerated and found guilty of some of the charges alleged by a jury, is it typical that you remain in custody?
So it depends. It's a really good question. It depends on how long you've been in custody. It looks like, again, based on reading, reporting from what's happening right now, that the judge is saying that the pretrial detention was mandatory. And the judge is going to look at what typically happens when you have been found guilty of what happened in this case, what's called a Mann Act violation. And so I think your question is so well crafted in the sense that this is not a typical defendant, but we want to treat this in as typical a way as possible in the sense of what generally happens. He was detained pre-trial. The judge has said that was mandatory. You didn't fall within one of the exceptions. What now happens when you've been convicted of two of those particular charges? That's what the judge is going to be looking at. And again, right now, considering it sounds like statements that the defense made, essentially admitting that Sean Combs is somebody who has had personal problems, but they were doing so to try and argue that he should not be found guilty.
And Jessica, just to update you and our audience, I've been told from the control room that the judge has said that Sean Diddy Combs will remain detained until sentencing. That is the announcement from the judge, detained until sentencing. I don't think we have, or maybe we do, I might have missed it, it's certainly possible, a sentencing date yet?
I don't think so. I think we could see this happen in a few weeks. What's going to happen is that the prosecution will submit a sentencing memorandum. The defense will do the same. And the prosecution will argue that there are aggravating circumstances here. The prosecution, I think, will argue that there is evidence that and facts that the jury heard, which are related to the crimes that he was convicted of, that indicate that there should be prison time in this case. The defense will say there's mitigating factors. It's a first time offense. He wasn't convicted of those more serious charges. And then the judge really has discretion. There's no mandatory minimum here. The judge will make a determination as to what is in the interest of justice. Let's remember, federal judges have a lot of discretion about what to do here.
And Jessica, just for the benefit of the audience, and this is a hard thing I'm going to ask you, but sift the not guilty and guilty verdicts, and if it's possible, put them in a dimensionality of gravity. Clearly, the most serious charges Sean Diddy Combs was found not guilty of, but it's not as if he's getting off scot-free. Try to help my audience get a sense of what the jury wrestled with and where it came down.
Yes. So I've talked to a couple of prosecutors throughout the day, and they've said, look, let's be clear. This is a win for the defense. This is a great day for the defense. And that the charges, the prostitution charges, trafficking somebody for the purpose of prostitution, that those charges were really, I think, all but almost conceded. I mean, the prosecution had to prove them, but that when it comes to the charges where there was a conviction, they were the much easier charges for the prosecution. They were the more straightforward charges for the jury. So when it comes to us thinking about the difference between the gravity of the charges where the jury did not find guilt and the gravity of the charges where there was a conviction, there really is a huge gulf here. And again, I think when it came to, it's not just the more serious charges, but it's the more complex charges, where the jury, in order to, for instance, find guilt on the racketeering charge, was going to have to find not just that Sean Combs had kicked his girlfriend, had beat people up, had engaged in truly abhorrent behavior, but that he ran a criminal enterprise and that his actions clearly fell within that racketeering statute, which, as we're seeing today, those are often difficult cases to prove. And so I think what we see in general is the jury really did what we want juries to do. They parsed. They didn't say, we think he's a bad guy, guilt. They went count by count, piece of evidence by piece of evidence, and they really parceled through.
Impossible to say, Jessica, but if you could try to convey what the prosecution will seek in terms of sentencing, you've outlined the defense will say no time. Any way to proffer a guess as to where it might land?
So I think there's a maximum of 10 years on each count for which there was a conviction. It sounds like the prosecution is going to be arguing for something potentially over the midline, over 5 years, only because we're just trying to look at their language of saying they're going to ask for substantial time here. Um, I have to say, given what we talked about before, the pretrial detention, given that he's going to remain in custody, I think we can read a few tea leaves. One, it's absolutely not outside of the realm of possibility that there will be some prison time. I do not think that we will see double digit years in prison. And I think outside of trying to go within those parameters, it's hard to know because in some ways it is so judge specific.
Clear and concise analysis as always. Jessica, please stay with me. I want to bring in my CBS colleague, Elaine Quijano. This was a very highly attended, carefully watched trial. There was an overflow room for reporters and others. Elaine was in the overflow room today as the verdicts were read and much of the other procedural processes played out. Elaine, catch us up.
Yeah, so Major, this morning, before that verdict came, I can tell you I was in that overflow room. And it was interesting to note, according to people who have been at that trial for the duration, that was the largest crowd many of them had ever seen in that overflow room to date. And of course, there was a lot of anticipation about what this jury would decide. And then just before the jury was brought back into the room, as Sean Combs was sitting there, it was interesting to watch a bit of the sort of atmospherics, if you will. He sat alone at a defense table, seemed to be very intently reading or thumbing through his notebook or a book that he had in his lap. And then when the judge came in, everyone stood. He turned to the jury box as the jury came in and was clearly relieved when that first count on that racketeering conspiracy charge came back as not guilty. We saw him visibly put his hand to his temple. He seemed to be very relieved at that point. And at one point later, he turned to his family, who was sitting just 2 rows behind him, and did a prayer gesture as the remainder of those counts were read. So it was a highly emotional scene. And of course, that all was at the beginning of this day. There have been a number of developments since then, but just generally, Major, that atmosphere there underscores the very intense level of interest in this case from the very beginning, not just members of the media, not just national media, but global media that has assembled there. And outside the federal courthouse, you haven't seen a lot of these images, but there are a number of people from the general public who have essentially made sure they were there in the courtroom itself, day in and day out, camping out early, essentially, to get their seats for the days and weeks of this trial. Now, we're just getting in some new information here from our colleague Alice Gaynor at CBS News New York, who has been in the courtroom. She says that the judge proposes a sentencing date of October 3rd at 10 a.m. Again, this is a proposed sentencing date of October 3rd at 10 a.m. The defense says they would like an expedited sentencing schedule. And just reading, again, her account of what is ongoing at this moment, the parties are meeting and conferring. There will be a status update July 8th at noon. So that's the very latest, Major, that we're hearing out of the courthouse there, the Southern District of New York, where all of this has been taking place.
Elaine, you're joining us from the broadcast center in New York. I wanted to bring in our Jericka Duncan, who has just emerged from the courthouse with the latest details. Jericka.
Yeah, that's right. So the judge is also saying that Combs will get 10 months credit for time served. So as Elaine said, October 3rd is the sentencing date, but there is going to be a hearing on July 8th. The idea is the defense says they want to move that date up. They did submit information, a letter earlier before this hearing, and they said that they believe part of the reason why Combs should be freed, they said, is Mr. Combs was not convicted of a crime of violence. They had a section where they said the government overstates Mr. Combs' sentencing exposure, talking about the media exposure and the number of people that they believe were sort of already making decisions about his innocence or guilt and how that was out there. And then exceptional reasons, they put make detention inappropriate. So they listed their reasons, and I actually did run into one of Combs's defense lawyers outside, and I asked him about an hour ago, so do you know anything? Can you give us any insight? Do you think he's going to go home? And he just said he should go home. But he couldn't say anything more than that. So I know that one of our reporters, Katrina Kaufman, said when she was inside the courtroom, when he was initially read the verdict, it looked like, she said, he mouthed to his family, "I'm coming home." But it does not look like that is the case today, as the judge has decided that he will go back to the detention center and wait until his sentencing, which for now has been scheduled for October 3rd.
And Jericka, if I heard you correctly off the top, you said that Sean Diddy Combs will be granted 10 months time served. So walk my audience through what that means after sentencing. Is that a subtraction right off the top from whatever the sentencing is?
Exactly. It is time served already. So if a judge sentences him to 50 months behind bars, he's really going to be serving 40 from that moment moving forward because of the 10 months that he's already served. So that's typical in a lot of cases. But again, the question really remains, how much time will he get? The prosecution has made it very clear that they want the maximum amount of time. But there was something in the prosecution's letter where they acknowledged, because he has not been convicted of a crime before, that the likelihood of him getting a maximum sentence, or what would be a normal range, is somewhere between, I believe it said 51 and 63 months. But they know that there are cases which they cited in their letter in which some people receive more than that, or the maximum sentence, due to the crime that is alleged, or due in this case to the crime that someone is convicted of.
Jericka, Sean Diddy Combs is a cultural force, and his cultural reputation has doubtless been dented by this entire proceeding. What is the atmosphere right out there outside the courthouse as you're experiencing it?
It's pretty calm right now, Major, but there were times where it was very wild. There's a much larger police presence than I've ever seen since I've been covering this for the last almost full 8 weeks. But there were times where you heard cheering. I heard people debating about who was guilty and who was innocent. So you have people, I would say overwhelmingly more Combs supporters that have been here consistently than those who are on behalf of survivors and things of that nature. Something else I want to point out, though, that the defense did say in making their argument is they talked about this, too, in their closing arguments, is a post by Cassie Ventura when her initial lawsuit went out back in November of 2023. And they noted that she posted something that said domestic violence is the issue. So they tried to use the language that she posted about, apparently, and said that, you know, that's not what he was convicted of, and that should be considered as to why he's not a danger or threat or a flight risk. But the judge said, but he knew about the investigation too, and he should have known he needed to stay clean. Those were the words from Alice Gaynor, and that was in reference to the alleged beating of Jane in June of 2024. So there were so many people involved in facts to consider. I just heard somebody yell, bail is denied, woo! So, I mean, it can get a little chaotic at times. I saw a clip that I didn't see personally, but somebody putting baby oil on their body and celebrating. So it gets pretty wild out here at times, but right now things are pretty cool with the exception of the person yelling in the background right now who is also, you have some people that have consistently been out here yelling. He's one of those people. But there is at least 25, 30 police officers that I see lining the barricades about 30 to 40 feet to my left.
Jericka, Duncan, thank you. I want to bring back our CBS News legal contributor, Jessica Levinson. Jessica, this was a criminal proceeding. There are also civil implications. I have read some statements from attorneys representing others in the Sean P. Diddy world, and that's putting it broadly, that say they have clients who are likely to bring civil actions quite separate from what has just been playing out in New York.
Oh, absolutely. So, as you know, there are two different buckets of criminal cases that you can bring. We're talking about a federal case, and that's frankly why we're talking about more complicated charges here, because you have to have a federal hook, a hook to the Constitution that would give Congress the power to say, here is a crime. And one of those obviously is crossing state lines. Then there could also have been state criminal charges. And then, of course, as you talked about, I absolutely think that there will be civil cases. And those cases obviously are very different for two main reasons. One is that if you win, the thing you can get is money, not putting somebody behind bars. And two, that the standard of proof is much lower. So instead of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, you might have either clear and convincing evidence or preponderance of the evidence, which would allow for obviously an easier recovery because the relief you get is much less serious. It's taking somebody's money as opposed to taking away their liberty.
Jessica Levinson, thank you so very much. My thanks as well to Jericka Duncan outside the New York Federal Courthouse and Elaine Quijano from the Broadcast Center in New York. My appreciation to all of you. Our coverage of this trial continues tonight with a 1-hour special report. Sean Diddy Combs, the verdict. You can watch that right here on CBS News 24/7 starting at 9 Eastern. It will replay at 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific time.